It's actually very easy for you, Main Street, to fix economic inequality, to make capitalism and the economy start to work fairly for you too, not just the CEOs and the top 1%. It actually isn't rocket science at all, because you, Main Street, are potentially far, far more economically powerful than you realize. And here's why. 55% of Americans, directly or indirectly, IRAs, 401ks, etc., own America's publicly listed companies. It used to be 72% back in 2007. And in fact, this doesn't include people who, say, work for the government and have a pension with their state pension fund. So we live in what's called a shareholder primacy model, whereby shareholders are considered to be the owners of public companies, which means that 55% of Americans, you, are the boss of all these CEOs. That means that you, 55% of Americans, are responsible as the owners of these companies for everything that the CEO does, including the ongoing cutting costs via steady, massive job destruction, squeezing workers' pay and conditions, in other words, creating greater economic inequality, by America's publicly listed companies that we've seen, at least since the early 1990s, as part of the focus on short-term, quick results and next quarter's earnings. So don't blame the CEOs, they're only doing what they're asked to do by their owners, you, the shareholders. This is what I call the great cost-cutting gig, and it's been the main investment approach since the early 1990s. It's a form of what I call corporate anorexia, cutting companies down to the bone and then continuing to cut. How do you think that enables companies to compete for the long term, to grow, to innovate, to create lots of good jobs? It doesn't, of course. This is just kneecapping companies. It's why we're seeing such weak revenue growth, such a lack of innovation, and really poor productivity growth across the economy today. It's the short-term focus that is so badly handicapping companies throughout the economy and handicapping economic growth and investment returns for Main Street savers and pension fund beneficiaries. This is the short-termism model that we hear so much about, for example, from business leaders who understandably feel forced to comply to this value-destructive way of running their businesses. Ironically, this investment approach hasn't actually worked for Main Street savers because returns by the Wall Street active equity investment managers have been atrocious, as the hard data shows again and again. Remember, it's your money, it's Main Street's money that Wall Street's investment managers are using. But they can't change what they're doing, the models they've been using for over 20 years unless you, the client, asks for it. So what is the alternative, better model? Asking public companies that you own to focus instead on the long term. The focus needs to be on enabling companies to invest in their long-term growth, which can only come from investing in their productive capabilities, i.e. workers, in innovation, in productivity growth, etc., etc. This is what you must ask the public companies that you own to do. We know that this is the only way to generate robust, long-term economic and profit growth, and robust long-term investment returns for Main Street savers and pension fund beneficiaries. And we know, thanks to the IMF, the OECD, etc., that the more inclusive capitalism is, the stronger it is. That is Capitalism 101. If you want to learn more about this alternative, there's plenty of research by some of the greatest minds in the country. Nobel economist Edmund Phelps, Clay Christensen, Gary Hamel on innovation, or productivity experts like Professor William Lazanick, or business leaders like McKinsey's head Don Barton, or read investment legends on this topic like Jack Bogle, Bob Monks, John Kay, etc. But how do you ask for this alternative? Up until now, it has been nearly impossible for you, 55% or more of Main Street, as owners of America's publicly listed companies, to exercise your ownership over your dollars, i.e. to exercise your economic power. Because there has been no central platform that allows you to do that. So you can only act individually, which means you have no power over the process, no economic power. But collectively, you have tremendous economic power, and that's why we're here. That's the whole point and purpose of this business roundtable for Main Street that we are building here, right at the heart of Wall Street. And if 55% of Americans come together to demand this alternative, your Main Street's collective wealth and ownership of America's public companies mean you will be heard.